Hello. Thank you all for coming to this wonderful event. It's a very special occasion, actually, for a couple of different reasons. Excuse me. Get this a little bit higher here. First of all, I would like to thank the whole crew at Inform for hosting this wonderful event and for doing so much for our cultural community, and the design community in particular. Let's have a round of applause for them. Thank you. And the Bensons have done so much, probably more than anybody else, for the design community. And we're also very honored here to have with us this evening Hugo and Brigitte Eppich, and members of the Eppich family, and Cornelia Oberlander. These are some of the people that were involved right from the beginning, along with my uncle Arthur and Francisco Kripacz, and of course Nick Milkovich is here as well, who will be speaking, along with Greg Bellerby, who very well put together all of the interviews and materials for this production. I just have a couple of notes regarding credits that I have to mention here. The Figure One team here is here as well, and we're very happy to do a second book with them. We did a launch here in 2015 of the Francisco Kripacz book. And I also meant to mention Greg also is the author, or the editor rather, of the modern West Coast Modern Houses book. And members of the Erickson family here as well too. We had to accompany this book, which became more of a story rather than just an architectural book. He added a great deal of depth with making sure that the story of the Eppichs was told, as well as a bit of a background of my uncle's work leading up to the Eppich House II. So from our family collection, we dug up a few rarities. Some of these you may have never seen before. And so I'm very thankful for the family and their help with this, and of course my brother for helping with the drawings. We had to digitize because these were all done back before we were working on computers. And Michelangelo Sabatino wrote the foreword, and he said his regrets he can't be here tonight. He's the Dean of Architecture at IIT in Chicago. And he described it as an episode in Pacific Northwest architectural glamour. The other reason why this is a special evening is because this commemorates 10 years since Arthur's passing. And so I just have a few slides here just for remembrance. Sorry, that was a bit too fast. This is in the war days with my dad on the left, who passed away in December, and his mom traveling around the world. And of course the 1950s Filberg house. With Jeffrey Massey at Simon Fraser University. With his mom after winning the Royal Bank Award. World travels, using his Hasselblad on this one. We have quite an amazing collection of his world travel slides. Here with his friends Francisco and Pierre Elliott Trudeau in Tibet. at his home in Toronto, where he had a 14-foot-long Liechtenstein painting on the wall with Prince Charles, receiving one of many doctorates, and a speech at the Museum of Anthropology on his 80th birthday. And this takes us to how the whole book came about. Hugo suggested the idea, and we had this interview in our collection, and Hugo did too, of a wonderful interview at the house with Arthur in 1997. So I said, let's get the whole thing. And then, you know, when you see these, you don't know what they've edited out, and we needed all of that text to formulate the book. Here's a little clip of Arthur speaking in the interview.
Time you're ready.
Yes, one thing that's very important about any work of architecture, and I think houses included definitely, and that is that there are three critical individuals that make a good building. And I think the architect's only one of them. The other is the builder, and the builder has to be an extraordinarily talented and precise person, and in this house in particular, building this way, doing furniture of this caliber, required enormous skill and attention to detail. And the other is the client. I've always said that the only good buildings I've done have been with extraordinary clients, people who encouraged and permitted me to do things that I felt were important. And sometimes I look back on projects I've done, and I thought, you know, how did they let me get away with this? And so it requires the courage of the client, the belief that you can do something, and that is how you accomplish your best work. And I think the architect is not this extraordinary person. He's just responding to the opportunities that a project presents to him, and the encouragement that the client gives is essential to that, and the skill of the builder is also essential to it.
Of course, we had to make sure that the most other important people were interviewed as well. Hugo Eppich, of course. We did a few interviews with Hugo, and also with Nick, and also Cornelia Oberlander provided some wonderful recollections of the experience. And this is just an opportunity to speak a little bit about this incredible family and some of their contributions to society. This is a portrait of Hugo and his brother Helmut at their Ebco factory, where they produce things like the cyclotron, vacuum chamber, the many tunnel bores that go right through mountains to put highways in. That one was for Yugoslavia. Projects like this with site for Expo 86. It was called Highway 86. Wonderful sculptures all over the city. If you see something made of steel, it's probably one of the Eppichs creations, such as the new domes at the Law Courts, or the Robson Square rather, which Arthur preferred over the originals. They couldn't get this kind of glass when they did the originals. And Ebco, of course, did a spectacular job of producing these. Chung Hung sculpture at Kitts Point. This incredible menorah, which was designed by Arthur for a synagogue in Richmond, which never got built. And every year, here it was under construction in their factory. They bring it out for Hanukkah, and here you can see the mayor and Rabbi Fiegelstock of Richmond going up to illuminate. It's 25 feet tall, this thing. And they go to great expense to do this for the community. They've done more, gave back more than anybody I can think of to our community. One of the brothers that didn't get here from Germany when they immigrated back in the 50s was their brother Egon. He became a very prominent contemporary artist in Germany and went on to do wonderful work, including sculptures for the first Eppich House. This was one of his shows in Germany. And these are some of the sculptures in the garden, of course, produced at Ebco, at Helmut's house. So that was where it's the relationship with Arthur Erickson started with the Eppich House I, and it was Egon who introduced Arthur to the Eppichs after seeing SFU back in the 60s. He said, well, you've got to get Arthur Erickson to do your house. And at this point, I would like to turn the mic over to Greg Bellerby, who has done a wonderful job with our book and all the writing for it of the main architectural aspects. Then I'll come back in and talk a little bit about the furnishings. Thank you. I just have to get a few notes out here, just so I know what I'm going to be talking about. And I'm going to sit down. Is that okay? So I'm also going to refer to a couple of quotes that are in the book, because as Jeffrey was saying, that a number of people were interviewed for the book, and we have those. And Arthur himself was very articulate and understood his work very, very well, and he spoke about it very, very well. So one of the things that I think is really great about the book is that it's not, one single voice talking about the project and talking about Arthur's work, but it's multiple voices from different points of view and from different time. And so that it really kind of, it's a conversation amongst these people about how Arthur's work developed, and then also how this, what I think to be a really unique project, the Hugo and Brigida's house. So, I also want to say that I was really, really thankful and really pleased that I was asked by Figure One to work on this project, and it provided me with an opportunity that I hadn't really thought I would have. I have also, for many, many years, been a great admirer of Arthur Erickson's work, and knew what I thought was quite a bit about it. But of course, faced with the idea of developing a text that was going to go along with this book about this unique house, I suddenly realized, well, I certainly needed to know a whole lot more before I could write this thing. So for me, it was also a personal opportunity to be able to come to a greater understanding of Arthur's work and his life. And so that sort of was the beginning point for me with this project, is to sort of say, well, here we have this house, which is completely done, and it had been done for some time. Well, how did it get here? How did it get there? What was the process that went into it? And what was Arthur thinking, and how did he think, of this design project? And where did the ideas come from? So of course, I started to look through all the material that was available on Arthur. and found that, well, there's a wealth of information, and also there's a wealth of projects. And I think that in some sense the Eppich House II really was informed by all the other projects that had come before it. And I think that's really an important aspect of any artist's work or any architect's work, is that it really does get informed by the things you have done previously. And that's a pretty logical thing. I wanted to, I have a quote here in the beginning. Just bear with me while I find it here. And this was written in a publication that Babs Shapiro did many, many years ago, I think in the late 70s, which was an exhibition of Arthur's drawings that circulated to a number of places. And Babs was an architect here in Vancouver for many years. And I think this is, when I read this, I thought, well, this is the point where I think I can proceed from. And so Babs Shapiro goes to say, Erickson's projects avoid formulaic solutions, but nevertheless bear his signature as recombinations and reinventions of his past works, pressured into novel variation by new contextual influences and unique programs. And I think in some sense, this is Arthur's, that's his process. Through his travels, through everything that he had learned and seen and observed, his own experience, he would then integrate into his projects. And yes, they were probably recombinations and reconfigurations, but they were always, I think, in some sense, had some kind of unique quality that could be identified with Arthur Erickson's work. I'm going to go the right way here, I think. Yeah. Let's go back. Maybe go back. This is the Gordon Smith house, the first one. And this was actually the first project that Arthur did, along with Jeff Massey. And so when my exploration was beginning with this, I was thinking, well, one of the first things that Arthur talked about was the relationship of the site and how important the site was. And I think when he designed this house, that's what he was thinking about, because it's the first one that I think he really considered the forest location of this house. And also the kind of ruggedness that it's in West Vancouver, as we know. And it's a very kind of, even West Vancouver is a unique environment for the West Coast. And so the house is elevated over that landscape, over that site, and he retained as many trees as he could, and also as many rocks and things that were already located at the site. So for me, the Smith House one, not only was a great project, very simple, very small house, but well done. It really exemplifies that first inkling of how important the site was to Arthur. This is the Stegeman House, which is, I guess, the Cullen House today. And Arthur, again, this was like the second house. And again, like Gordon Smith, Stegeman was an artist. His wife was an artist. And so the first couple of houses that he did were designed for artists, which made perfect sense at that time, because there was a very cohesive environment for the relationship between art and architecture. Artists, shared the same milieu together as what architects. There was no separation. They saw, their activities as being ones that was, in some sense, codependent. And a big promoter of that was Bert Binning, as an artist and also as an architect. And he would promote that. And so, they worked around in the same environment. So it wasn't unreasonable to find that Arthur would be working for, his first project would be for artists. And the Stegeman House here is also what he did was, it was on a very, very steep slope. And so he made use of that steep slope by, having the house come out, and this very large volumetric space was caused by the slope of the landscape. So the Killam Massey House, again, also for me, this pointed out how
how experimental Arthur was, and that he was really open to new materials and experimenting. And I know the roof was made of some kind of new polystyrene kind of material, and also the skylights were done, which were new for that time. Also, so he was really open to experimentation, but also, again, a very rugged site. And again, another example of how he was able to capitalize on a very rugged site and build something that was part of that and responded to that environment. And speaking of experimentation, this is the Grauer cabana, steel and plastic. And again, not only was it about new materials, but I think it's also about new forms. I mean, I don't think people on the West Coast had really seen these kind of forms like this, but they came out of Arthur's fascination with culture, his travels, and he absorbed those ideas from different cultures and kind of reiterated them in different forms here in the projects that he did. And another example of that is the Filberg House. And I have a quote which I'm going to find here for you. But the Filberg House for me is also a watershed work of Arthur's, in that this was the project where he was really allowed to be able to do something which I thought was really unique and that we had never seen before. I mean, this was still a time when post and beam houses were still, the most common thing that you would see. Well, this is sort of a post and beam, but so far from a post and beam in its vision, I think. And also, again, it showed a couple of things which he was to do later and was to do at the Eppich House II, which was to reshape the site, reshape the landscape. So he and Rob Filberg worked together with a bulldozer, to reshape that landscape so that it actually enhanced the way the house would be situated and the way the house would sit in that site and in that landscape. For me, it was also the first time that we see. I really want to share this quote with you. This is a quote from Bing Tong, because the Filberg was one of the first times, and again, Arthur repeated this, the idea of the pavilion, because the Filberg house is essentially a pavilion. And this is Bing Tong. There is a strong Asian influence on the West Coast, and he understands that and expresses it. Many of his structures are like pavilions, with roofs and columns, but few walls. Our climate is mild but damp, so all we need is an umbrella. And where many architects' tendency is to nestle against the ground, his approach is to stand above the rain and let the light come in and get you out of bed. In our mists and grayish light, you need strong buildings. So, and again, for me, this is something that the Filberg House exemplifies, that idea of the pavilion. And of course, again, experimentation. This is the Boltby terrace shade structure. Again, innovative form, innovative structure. Arthur traveled to Japan and spent time studying traditional and contemporary architecture there. And when he returned, he purchased a small lot and for his own house. And in that house, he created a garden. And here you see the garden with the pond, which he had done. He excavated and filled it. And it really is the house, and his house and the pond became an exploration of the relationship between site and architecture. And in the house, he sort of practiced what he preached, and he would put into use what he was thinking about in terms of that relationship. And the other one for me, which is also a really kind of standout house, is the Baldwin House. This is on Burnaby Lake. And for me, even though it's a post and beam house and a wood house, for me it has so much of an influence of Japan. For me, it's like I have seen so many images of Japanese houses and Japanese tea houses where, the verandas open up onto a pond or a lake. and there's that serenity that happens. And I think with this house, again, very much like a pavilion, but also, very influenced, I think, by Japanese architecture, but with Arthur's own unique kind of take on it. SFU, of course. This is after Japan as well. And I think his experience in Japan with Japanese contemporary architecture influenced that. And there's not enough can be said about SFU. As I said, it was when Egon Eppich came to Vancouver, he was wowed by SFU, and when he talked to Helmut, I'm not sure if he talked to Hugo about it as well, but I know that from what I understand, he was quite impressed with that project and thought, well, if you want to hire an architect, hire Arthur. Gordon Smith II, national treasure, and this house again. I want to just read a couple of quick quotes here because I think they really are important. And this is what Arthur said. He says, this is not specifically about the Smith house, but in general. He said, after Japan, my houses ceased to be composed of a variety of materials and instead became as much as possible expressions of one material, reminiscent almost of sculpture. And for me, the Smith house is very sculptural. It sums up so many things that Arthur was doing at the time and thinking about. And I want to find one other quote here. Okay, back. So again, the Smith house for me is also about the building and the site. And Arthur talks about what he was trying to do with this house by saying, I wanted the Smith house to reveal the site in the same way that I found it revealed to me when I first walked onto it. Through the forest clearing, one would discover the fern-covered rift between the rocks. Then, at the end, the distant sea view through the vertical stems of young firs. To keep these inherent characteristics unspoiled demanded a very careful placement of the building's parts so that they occupied the least interesting parts of the site, thus saving the best parts for the enjoyment from the house. So again, this consideration of landscape, site, was something that was, so important to Arthur. And I think the Smith house is certainly, represents all of that. I think also it also is a bit of a pavilion as well in the same sense, large areas of glass, but a very, very simple pared down structure. The Graham house from about the same time for me represents, how the masterful way in which Arthur could exploit a difficult site and an almost unbuildable site. And this is one of these hallmarks, was that he was able to take those very, very difficult sites and turn them into something that was very unique and one of a kind. And he was a master at that. Robson Square, an urban garden. I mean, again, what more can you say about it? It is still today, I think, a stunning place to visit. And the law courts. I know I've been in the law courts not that quite recently, and they still are kind of awe-inspiring, I think, in many ways. And the gardens, after all these years, are still beautiful and still wonderful to be in on a sunny day like today. If you walk through there, because there's places to sit, where you're out in the sun and away from the wind, and they're just beautiful. Museum of Anthropology, and this is the Bagley Wright House in Seattle. Bagley Wright was a collector and philanthropist, and again, these are examples of houses that Arthur did, which was sort of his next phase, which was the use of experimenting with new materials with concrete. And again, he was a master with concrete, as we know, with Robson Square, with the Museum of Anthropology, with the Macmillan Bedell building. He really knew how to use that material, which is not something that was rarely used for residential projects. And this all kind of led up, and this is one of Egon's sculptures in the pond. And that's Eppich 1, yep. Yep, that was Eppich 1. This is Eppich 2. And again, I'm going to kind of, I don't want to say too much because I know Nick is here. I mean, he was the project architect on this, so whatever I say, Nick will probably say, well, no, that actually didn't happen. We actually did something else. But I just want to say, that I think that the Eppich House II was really a unique project and a unique opportunity for Arthur that he recognized for a couple of reasons. One, the client, as he talked about in the clip that Jeffrey showed, that it really was three things that you need to have for a successful project. You needed to have a client with vision. You needed to have an exceptional builder. And then the third component was the architect. And with the Eppich 2 house, you had the client and the builder as the same person. And I think that really made a huge difference in how the house became so finely resolved and finely finished. And it wouldn't have been done without those three. And I'll just go through some of the catches in the model. Again, looking for me, the site, he worked on the site and realized what he needed to do there, and to site the house at the far end of the property. This is a shot of at Ebco factory where they manufactured the columns that were used in the house. Here's a construction site with the columns starting to be in place. Arthur, Cornelia Oberlander, who was also brought in to work on the garden and the landscaping with Arthur. And again, there was extensive work done on it. You can see those terraces, and there they are, digging the pond at the bottom. And then the terraces, which were kind of inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright and what had been done at Taliesin West with natural stone and concrete. And these became a way of bringing order, I think, to the site. And one of the things that I think, they put a pond, diverted the creek, and there was a pond at the bottom. There's many different aspects, I think, that are really unique to this house. The use of steel, there's a shot of the pond, of course. The steel structure was something that was an opportunity that Arthur saw that was once in a lifetime opportunity. He wouldn't have got an opportunity to do it if it wasn't for Hugo and Eppich and the Eppich family and Ebco to be able to realize Arthur's vision and to be able to create this thing, because ordinary people under an ordinary situation probably wouldn't have been able to afford to do something so intricate, and yet it was done. Also, for me, what I really, in visiting the house, what I found such a pleasure, these are the terraces, fully grown and with reflecting pools to bring in light, was the fact that, the house had goes from, basically the site goes from a kind of forested situation through to this steel and glass and I think sort of machine-like house. So going from this natural environment to this house that has more sort of mechanical and machine-like qualities, and it's quite, it is truly a unique project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Greg. I just would like to speak briefly about the interiors and furnishings of this incredible house. coming from outside in from the parking level, getting a glimpse into the interior and how the furniture works with the whole structure of this house. And all custom designed furniture for the house. Fantastic pieces that are unique to this house, and now part of the Erickson design collection. Some of the tables, all of this was produced at Ebco. And Hugo hired one of the top guys from Vitra to handle aspects of the upholstery, and it's absolutely superb. Unique lighting concept by Francisco. Everything from the chandeliers to the candlesticks, the chairs, the tables, the placemats, the artwork was all done by Egon Eppich and complements the house, and it was all placed by Arthur and Francisco. Each one of these pieces in these photographs, they were all placed by them, and Hugo insisted that they don't be moved. The brushed and polished stainless steel mats, just another one of these wonderful Egon Eppich artworks. I always show the original fireplace because not everybody believes me that it's supposed to be white. Somehow it became turned black over time, but it should be white. This wonderful transparent view from the kitchen area where Brigitte insisted that she could see what's going on outside with the kids, and it didn't matter which level of the house. That's what he delivered. Another one of the very nice custom tables designed. The chairs were by another designer. The hot tub and pool, how they work together, and just some unique features. This is going upstairs. Again, you get this wonderful artwork by Egon. Hugo's office is at the very back on the top floor, with wonderful views all the way to English Bay. And the custom lighting that Francisco and Arthur came up with, this is back in the early 80s. Now everybody, I notice, is doing these kinds of mirrors with a frosted finish around the edge. And the beautiful vanity stool designed by Francisco, and using this aqua-colored fabric, which he wanted to carry through the bedroom. And even on this console that used to hold the TV that popped out of the ground automatically at the push of a button. Back when a TV was only, 24 inches wide. Now they have one hanging from the ceiling. The view from the bedroom. And then Nick Milkovich is going to say a few words for us about the Eppich studio. Nick, would you like to join us, please? This was designed by Nick Milkovich after Arthur passed away. Nick was also the project architect on the house itself, working with Arthur, and did an absolutely wonderful job. He's the master detailer of Arthur's houses. Here we go.
Actually, I'm still learning.
There we go.
No, thanks.
I have a few more parting shots after this.
Yeah, the studio, when you see what's there, so you don't compete what's above, so you have to take a different tack to what you do at the studio. And I'll tell you just the best part of this story is really, why the studio is there and how it came about. And the studio is quite a simple little building. This is a look at the house, and you saw the nighttime photo of the reflection of the house in the pond. And Hugo became fond of this spot. And you can see why when and at first it was what drew them to it, is the reflection of the house. But then, and when you look closely, especially this photograph, you see it's probably intuitive or you just feel it, but it's, you see that, but you also see Cornelius' landscape. You see the house stepping over the rubble rocks connecting to the upper portion of the site. And you see along the pond, you see the forest on the east side of the house where the pond seems as if it emanates from there. So these are all the pieces that made this spot special. But there was two other things that you can't see from this shot. You're right next to the creek or just above it. You can hear it and you can see it. This is the only place on the site you can get that of any other position. So from that, Hugo, the discourse started, and I think this lasted over 10, 15 years, didn't it? And it was about, he said, I really like being there. So, it'd be nice to be able to sit when I get here and spend some time. So we said, well, maybe a little deck at the end of the pond would be able to do that. He said, well, maybe other people might want to sit with me. So the deck became a little bit larger and more chairs showed up. And he said, well, if we're going to leave this furniture here, maybe it should have a roof. Well, you're guessing where this is going. All it needed was some walls. And, then it got a little more elaborate, and it became a little studio of 600 square feet that one could visit, socialize, spend the night. There's a bed that comes out of the wall. So this is how this thing happened. There's never, I want a studio or anything like this. It's just a dialogue over many years and having fun at it. So this shot gives you basically the relationship of the studio to the house and to the creek and all that, and it's the context. But it also starts to point to the form of the studio and how it came about. When you see the two quarter circles at the top, those are two entry canopies, and they were the only curved plan elements in the whole house. So the studio took that form. And I'll show you the next sketch that gives you the schematic or the sketch drawing for it. But it also felt like you're trying to sit into the site, something that's more of the landscape than a building. So that's a softer form. And that was the quick little doodle. The quick little doodle that I did when we started talking about, and I thought of the two little canopies coming together. And even at that early stage, you start laying out furniture. But this is, this is what Arthur did all the time. He's furnishing the place, so he knows how you want to use it. That was always part of his planning in the earliest. And we had a stair at the back going down to the rest of the site that changed. So this is just a quick. A plan. It's a very simple little thing, with a seating area, a fireplace, and there's a bed that comes out of the wall if you want to spend the evening. And there's a bathroom and a small kitchen. It's a studio, a guest house, or whatever. And it was built quite simply. Just of the section, what's that bouncing off? How do I freeze this guy? Anyway, it was just a sectional drawing of the studio. So, we're partly in a creekside setback zone, which is 15 meters from the top of the bank. So you had to respect that. And the studio actually, it's 15 meters setback, but no building beyond within 5 meters of the creek. So the house just barely touches the site at the edge of the pond, and it's a foundation wall that becomes a reinforcement to that end of the pond. And then the site drops quickly, and the rest, there are 3 columns. They're sitting on piles, just barely touching the site. Site was left natural under it. Well, back to that, this is the attempt to blend it. So the other thing is the coloring. The other house is white, and it stands out quite strongly out of the site. And it's sort of like a white sculpture dancing over rubble walls up the hill. Well, this is different. This is grown into the site, so it's quiet and a backdrop, and it's a viewpoint. So it's not trying to become anything more than that. So even the roof is planted, so it's really a garden piece. And these are some of the outlooks, views along the pond to the house. And another one, and Cornelia's landscape dancing down to the house across the pond. And this is at nighttime. A nice place to steal away. And again, from inside, this is an outlook towards the deck. They could have breakfast hanging over towards the creek. So it's a place to enjoy the totality of the site. And if you looked at some of the shots that Greg showed of the house, you saw those sort of rusty-looking panels. Well, that was all produced in Ebco, and there's stainless steel that are treated in something, but they're not predictable. You get a variety. And I know on the first house, Arthur even liked the fact that they're not regular, that you can't predict it, because the house is so tight and fine. Then these panels dance a different tune. But in this, so the whole back of the studio towards the forest is clad with these panels. But it's the nice thing I like about it becomes part of the landscape because the trees kind of reflect and bounce, so they dance together. That's all I have to say. My time was, just to talk about the studio, but I'm willing. Yeah. I'm willing. I know there's a lot of students here, and I'm willing to take a lot of questions after.
Yes.
After, not away from the mic.
Yes, we will be taking questions very shortly. Just a few parting shots. Oh, I got this thing upside down. There we go. So these are just a few family albums kind of shots, just for fun. Have at the end here. Here's a couple of gatherings at the house. Yes, on the left we have Hugo and Brigida and Arthur's friend, actress Shirley MacLaine. And on the right we have a rare shot of Francisco there at the house with Arthur and all 3 of the next generation, Sonia, Monica, and Gord, of the Eppich family. And it's just been used in this new movie, Cold Pursuit, starring Liam Neeson. It gets a lot of requests for various kinds of documentaries and films. There's a French-Canadian production here on the top, HGTV, fashion shoots, the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation visiting the house. And I think this coincided with a medal that they gave Arthur, the Frank Lloyd Wright medal, and he had, for the initiation, he had to go down and sleep in Frank's bed down at Taliesin. which he, surprisingly, he said it was just too small. He says, my feet were sticking out the end. And a lovely shot of Hugo with Nick Milkovich and Cornelia Oberlander. And the furnishings have been on display here at the West Vancouver Museum with one of Egon's artworks. And by the way, this artwork it represents the sculpture that was produced for Helmut and Hildegard's garden. And at the last launch here for the Francisco book, and the Bensons and team here at Inform got all of the main furnishings here for it. We were absolutely delighted. And so we also did bring some copies of the Francisco book that are also available at the front counter. And a little parting shot from Hugo, or from Arthur.
Again, Frank Lloyd Wright was an influence on me in the way I site buildings and also in the use of materials. I don't think he would have treated a steel building this way, but what he always did was try to explore the nature of the material and somehow express that in the way he used it. And I think this is what we've done in this house, and I think it was a compliment to the Eppichs and their extraordinary success as steel entrepreneurs in this area to explore to the farthest extent the use of their material in domestic housing. I don't think that's been done before.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you very much for coming to this, and we welcome any questions or input from the audience that you might have.
Who wants the mic?
Thank you.
Questions, anybody? Just put up your hand and we'll, come on.
Yeah, I guess I'll just start off with a really light question. Given the amount of metal and white in the actual structure and then the wilderness, the immediate wilderness around the building, I was just curious, how much upkeep does it take to keep this structure so pristine and so beautiful?
Well, would you like me to answer? Fortunately for this house, the owners have just taken the most care it could be imagined and always repainted it when it needed it, made sure the gardens looked good and the pool looked good. We could only hope that whoever has this house in the future will continue that tradition. But like any architecture or design, you have to maintain it. And this is actually a real problem with some of Arthur's buildings. They're not properly maintained. That's not the case here.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of its, dare I say, its charm or whatever, is the fact that it's as it was when it was built. So often, over a 20 or 30 year period, a house goes through a number of renovations, often bad, trying to update them, whereas this house is as it was when, the Eppichs moved in. And I think that in this day and age, that is pretty fantastic, and also one of the things that make this house so remarkable.
See, we have another question in the back there.
I'm just wondering who the structural engineer was, please.
The structural engineer was Cho, was it?
Toby Russell?
C.Y. Lowe.
C.Y. Lowe.
There he is. C.Y. Lowe. Would you like to say something? Okay, please. Cornelia has a correction.
I entered Arthur's office for Robson Square in 1974. So on the Eppich House #1, Mr. Robillard, who was a horticulturist, did the landscape, and I only came on to tell him about the roses and the balcony later. So that should be corrected. Number 2, I started with the Eppich House #2 in Arthur's office, guided by Nick. And I heard Arthur scream every time there was a building. Building and site must achieve a fit. And so I saw the house perched on the hill, and I saw the architecture, and I echoed the architecture of the house with the rolling slopes. And one day I didn't know what to do, so I called up Arthur and said, Arthur, you got to help me with the lake. And Arthur appeared, and we did the lake for you. Remember? Yeah. So I think that's very important to note. The building and site must achieve a fit. I heard that many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah, not better.
No, I can come up.
Nick.
Yeah. No, I just like to add, I finished a little bit too quickly. But, I mean, these things are not for the people that are afraid or light of heart. Mm-hmm. These are courageous efforts by the client. And, the involvement on both of the houses that I was really lucky to work on, of the client, and not only just providing the money for the giving us the program, but it's just their engagement in the process was incredible. And they would help. Like in Hugo's house, we worked with the shop to detail it, to figure out how to build the curved beams and all that. And so when you sit down with the client and actually solve the building, it's a totally different experience. It's really quite incredible. And it's, Lou Kahn said, watch a person that works with their hands. They may show you a better way to do it. And, I always remember that, because the contractors and the builders on these things, the same fellow guided both construction sites for both houses, the first one and the concrete one and this one. And he was also my teacher. So I'd like to thank Hugo for giving me the chance to work on these kind of projects.
Thank you very much, Nick. And it reminds me, we really should have a round of applause for the Eppichs, for all of their tremendous efforts and what they've given back to society, in Vancouver particularly. Yeah. Is there any more questions?
On that note, thanks for coming, everybody. The books are on sale at the front desk, and hope everyone has a great evening. Thanks, guys. Thank you.